Please welcome Jonathan Butcher, Acting Director of the Heritage Foundation's Center for Education Policy.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Heritage Foundation, and thank you for being here. I think there are two events happening at the same time, and you picked the right one, so welcome. My name is Jonathan Butcher. I'm the Acting Director of Education here at the Heritage Foundation. I'm also the Will Skillman Senior Research Fellow in Education. And we're here for a very serious topic. We're going to talk about the welfare of young people in K-12 schools and what happens when the adults who are responsible for those children derelict their duty. This matters nationally because in schools around the country, there has been a variety of directives issued to them over the last 20 years at least when it comes to school discipline policy. For those of you who remember the Obama administration in 2014, they recommended to schools, actually directed schools, to keep quotas on the race of the students who they disciplined with suspension or expulsion. You can imagine the effect that that would have as schools were threatened with investigations by the Office of Civil Rights if their numbers did not match what Washington wanted them to have. Now, when the Trump administration the first time came through, they went through a very deliberative process of looking at school discipline and school safety and released the 2018 Federal Commission on School Safety report, which had some very common sense suggestions for educators, school resource officers, for parents, to make sure that teachers could maintain order in the classroom, and that it came down to the issue of keeping violent students out of the classroom because the effects on their peers, clearly from evidence, was found to be negative, both in terms of academics as well as school climate surveys demonstrated that teachers didn't feel safe when there were violent students could not be removed from the classroom. It matters locally and personally, as we're about to hear. It's my pleasure to introduce our guests today. And let me introduce them, and then I'll invite them up to the stage, and then I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, Stephen Gilchrist. But I would add that we have two very important perspectives that we're going to be offering. One is very personal from Stephen's perspective of what his family went through, and then the other with Virginia Gentles, who's had tremendous experience at the state level as well as the national level, as well as the advocacy level in representing parents and working in favor of not just school choice, but good education policy. So with that, let me introduce them to you, and once I get through your bios, I'll invite you up to the stage. So Stephen Gilchrist is the chairman and CEO of the South Carolina African American Chamber of Commerce, where he leads a membership of over 15,000 businesses in the Carolinas, focusing on the significant needs of both large and small minority and African American owned businesses. He is an authority and leading voice on national public policy initiatives, including educational reform, alternative energy sources, and financial and economic security for low-wealth communities. He also is a fellow trustee with me with the South Carolina Public Charter School District. He has become a friend and someone who I deeply respect. So, Stephen, I'll welcome you to the stage. Please join me in welcoming Stephen. Of course. And our other panelist is Virginia Gentles. And I've known Virginia for several years, and it's been a pleasure to follow her work advocating for quality school options for students all over the country. Ginny, as she goes by, is the Education Freedom and Parent Rights Director at the Defense of Freedom Institute. She is a longtime school choice advocate and former state and federal education policy leader, regularly called to provide testimony before Congress and provide in-depth analysis of the issues facing American education for Newsweek, National Journal, Fox News, and other major media outlets. She served as senior political appointee in the U.S. Department of Education under President George W. Bush. She led the Florida Department of Education's Office of Independent Education and Parent Choice, managing the state's school choice programs. So please help me welcome Virginia to the stage. Our agenda today is going to be as follows. I'm going to welcome Stephen again to the podium, and he's going to share his story of what has happened to his family in South Carolina concerning this issue of school bullying. And then we're going to have a conversation. We're going to look at the issue from both a personal level, from a state policy level, from a federal policy level, and we're going to talk about what this means to creating great and safe educational learning opportunities for students all across the country. So with that, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Jonathan, for having me here today. I want to thank you for your leadership, your advocacy, and the work that you do, not only for the great work that the Heritage Foundation continues to do, but for our great state in the state of South Carolina. My name is Stephen Gilchrist, and I'm just delighted to be here with you today. And I want to thank all of you for showing up for this very important conversation, because I think if there's ever a time in the United States where we should focus on the needs of our children, particularly in our public schools, it's now. And so I want to thank you for being here. I have the pleasure of being able to talk about my personal story today. I was sharing with my assistant as we were preparing to arrive that I usually stand before groups and talk about the African American Chamber of Commerce, and I talk about small business initiatives across the country and what's happening in that space. I also get an opportunity to talk quite a bit about my role as President Trump's appointee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights, and more specifically what we're doing with the Commission on Civil Rights, both in his first term, and I'm proud to say that President Trump reappointed me in his second term and elevated my role as a designation as vice chairman of the commission. So I get a chance to talk about that a lot. I also get a chance to talk about my role as an advocate for public charter schools and school choice across the country, having served with my colleague Jonathan Butcher on the South Carolina Public Charter School Board of Trustees, something I had the pleasure of helping to found in our state some almost 20 years ago. But today I'm here to talk to you about my child. I'm here to talk to you as a daddy, as a father of a 14-year-old young man that suffered an enormous bullying and harassment situation at his public school. Now, before I get into this, let me paint you a little picture about who we are as parents. My wife is a 33-year educator. She worked in this particular school district for approximately 28 years as an elementary school teacher. So we're very known in the school district. We're very involved in the school district. And so it wasn't like no one knew who our children were. We have 3 boys. We have a 26-year-old son who's a musician, very talented kid that did a lot in the school district. We have a 30-year-old son who's a police officer that went through the school district. And we have the 14-year-old. We'll talk about how we ended up at that point later. But anyway, but my baby started this middle school in South Carolina, and I'm going to try to be careful not to mention the school, but we could talk about that at some point. And Jonathan, I don't know if I can or not, but if I can, I will. But he started the school in the 7th grade. And I remember the day that he came home, on his first day, he was very excited about it. And I had sent the principal a note, and I said, Daniel is very excited about his school year in middle school. He's excited about learning whatever he's going to learn. And I said, but I want you to do something for me, because as you know, we're an involved family, and we need Daniel to be engaged in school and provide opportunities for him to be engaged. And so they acknowledged that, we're excited about it. We're going to make that happen. It was about 2 weeks into the first few days of school that Daniel came home and he said, Dad, I don't like the environment here. And we questioned what that meant. We didn't know what that meant, but of course it's school. A lot of kids don't like to go to school. Daniel's no different. But what we found was that he started being sought out by kids who saw him as being a vulnerable child within his school. This continued for quite some time, to the point where my wife and I would contact the school over 180 times within a span of 2.5 years to say to them, there's a major problem going on here with kids bullying and harassing Daniel. And we really need you to help us figure this out. Well, nothing actually happened to any of those correspondences. They would obviously give us the song and dance that we're doing everything we can, and we're going to make sure that Daniel's okay, and and they would call him in and say, if there's anybody bothering you, all you have to do is report that. Well, October of 2024, and I'm fast forwarding a lot of this because I want to get to our conversation. I received a call that Daniel had been assaulted by a kid on the basketball court, where a child viciously punched him and violently punched him in the face numerous times. If you were to watch the video that my wife and I had the pleasure of seeing along with the authorities, you would see that Daniel was just simply playing basketball with the other children. And this kid just comes over and just numerous times punches him in the face. Daniel, you can clearly see as the video continues that Daniel is just kind of like, what just happened here? But what was even more striking about the video was that the children who were playing basketball continued to play. Unprovoked, Daniel didn't hit back. Daniel sort of kind of wobbled down the court a little bit, and he continued to play basketball. Now, the number one question you should ask is, where were the teachers? Who were the people watching this? And so I remember when my wife and I went to the school, we were outraged because I didn't see. So let me back this thing up for a minute. I picked up Daniel from school that day, and as we always ask him, how was your day at school? He said, oh, it was fine. He said, someone hit me in the face. When he said that, I looked at his face, and he had all these big knots in his face, and I said, oh my God, Daniel, what happened? And I remember pulling out of the driveway. I was so stunned by what I saw. I literally stopped in the middle of the road and in front of the school, and I looked in my rearview mirror, and I saw a police officer. And I didn't know who the police officer was, but I stopped my car in the middle of the road. I got out of the car, and I said, hey, man, I need your help. My son was just assaulted at the school. Well, come to find out, it was the school resource officer. So he escorts me back to the school, and we walk in at the end of the day, and Daniel tells them what happened. No one knew anything. So I want to fast forward back to the video when we had a chance to watch the video. My wife asked, where were the teachers when all of this was happening? And as we watched the video, you could see them far away, and they had what looked like at the time cell phones. But the principal said to us, my wife said, what are they watching? What are they looking at? They're not paying attention to the children, so what are they watching? And the principal said, oh, that's their walkies. We call them throughout the day, and they typically pay attention to our calls. And my wife just happened to touch the screen. She said, well, if you look right here, and when she touched the screen got much larger. And when it got larger, it showed the teachers that should have been paying attention to these children on their cell phones. Now, we have a cell phone ban in South Carolina for kids. And we could talk about that later, but anyway. So that was the first situation. By the way, that particular incident occurred on Daniel's birthday. It was the day that his birthday, but I can't go into, this is so much more detailed than I'm describing to you. So 1 week later, he was in the restroom, using the restroom, and a child reaches over the stall, unbeknownst to Daniel, and takes a photo of him while he's using the restroom. And the photo with the caption on it caught this word pooping, but he used the S word for pooping. He then takes the video and sends it all around the school, all around the community, to all of the coaches, because he was an athlete. He sent it to all the coaches' chat rooms or whatever that was, all over the place. We found out about the video at the end of the school day when Daniel said, someone took a video of me while I was in the restroom, and the kids are showing it to me. I pulled around to the front of the school that day. Now, you got to understand, this was a week after the assault had taken place. I pull around to the front of the school. I go in and I share the video that Daniel shared with me, that kids had shared with him. Long story short, the kid acknowledged that he sent the video because he thought it was funny and because Daniel was the butt of all jokes at the school. And he was the kid that everybody could pick on, and so it was funny. So we asked the school district, how are we going to handle this? By the way, and go back to the first incident for a minute. The kid that assaulted Daniel, that punched him in the face, was arrested based upon the video from the authorities for assault and battery. This second child was arrested for aggravated voyeurism and distribution in the school. 13-year-old kids. Now, here's what's even more striking about that. We asked the school district, what is your response to this? And they told Tammy and I that in order for them to apply their discipline policy to this child that committed voyeurism that was arrested, that we would have to file a Title IX petition in order for them to investigate what happened. Well, Tammy and I questioned that, and of course, now you guys would appreciate this. I've learned a little bit about Title IX being a United States Civil Rights Commissioner. So the school district was trying to explain to me that they could not apply their discipline policy to what happened to this child because we did not file or was not willing at that moment to file a Title IX petition. And so as a result of that, the child that committed the voyeurism remained in the school, even though the school district's policies indicated that if that infraction would occur, that child would have to be brought before the Board of Trustees. None of that happened. So Daniel was going back to school every day saying to me and his mom and Dad, he's still there. He's still there. He's going to class every day saying he's still there. This school district that I'm sharing with you is a majority African-American school district with about 30,000 students. All of the kids that were bullying Daniel were African-American students, every one of them. The school district is a majority Democratic school district. So they champion those causes. They believe in all of those things that many of us have fought against in public schools. They truly believe those things, and they have adhered to that. In August of 2022, the governor of our state had the inspector general to investigate the school district for a myriad of issues, particularly related to some of the information I'm sharing with you today. And I would encourage you to read that disturbing report of the disarray and dysfunction of this particular school district, which gives credence to what was actually happening to many of these children within this particular school district. My baby came home the night, a kid can get past a fight or whatever it was, when the boy punched him in the face. Boy, my son is not a fighter. We teach our kids when they go to school that you don't go to school to what? You don't go to school to fight. So my children would never retaliate in that way when they go to school. But I remember when the photo was taken, Daniel, you could clearly see that his entire demeanor for weeks was just completely distorted. He didn't want to be around any kids. He didn't want anybody to see him. And he came up to my room one night, and he said to me, he said, "Dad," he said, "you know, you help a lot of people. I see you help a lot of people, but I need your help now. I need your help." And that was a striking statement for me as a father who serves on the United States Commission on Civil Rights, as a father that's involved in everything that goes on, a lot of things that go on in my state, as a father that serves on public charter school boards and really involved in education and school choice and all of these things, for all of these other children around the country and around my state. And my baby says to me, "I need your help." I think if there's anything that we could take away from the conversation that we have today, and that is, how do we make sure that we create an environment in this country where children are safe when they attend public schools with public money? And I know we're going to talk about a series of policy recommendations that I think we certainly should begin to look at. But this particular, and you know, I'm giving you the abbreviated version, although you can certainly have a conversation with me later. We can talk a lot more about the details about what actually happened here. But I will share with you that Daniel's case is a microcosm of what is actually happening all over the United States in our public schools. And we have to take this seriously as a country. We have to take this serious as a community. And we have to re-empower parents to be engaged in the conversations that are necessary to protect children. So at this moment, Jonathan, I'll take my seat and prepare to engage in the conversation around what can we do to protect Daniel and children like Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for your courage and for sharing that powerful story. That is such a difficult thing to have to live through. So let's talk about the solutions. So Virginia, when I have done research, and when others in the school choice movement have done research on why people choose other schools, one of the top reasons is school safety. So take that wherever you want to go with it. Tell me about Florida. Tell me about the U.S. Federal policy.
Yeah, I'm glad that we're starting with this, because that isn't widely known. That when you survey parents, they're not putting academic quality test scores. Can my child get into the most competitive college at the top of their list? They're putting safety. And that goes for parents who are searching for alternatives to public schools, like private schools, but also public charter schools. So that safety is top of mind for parents across the country, and school choice policies across the country have allowed them to leave unsafe environments and enroll in safer, smaller, quieter, more responsive environments. And I think that's where your family story ends. My family had a similar experience, and it just is such a relief. It's just this weight off your shoulders, and you can finally relax for a little while. And one state in particular took that to the next step, and that's Florida. They created a Hope Scholarship Program in 2018 that was specifically for students who were victims of bullying. And this came out of this awareness that, okay, every state in the country has bullying policies in place, has a law that says, district, you need to be collecting data, you need to have a reporting mechanism in place, you need to be taking action on bullying. I think Montana was the last state in 2015. All these states have bullying laws. All these districts have bullying policies. Children are still victims. So when they are, they can't wait for the process to churn through and then often do nothing. They need to go. And so then State Representative Byron Donalds was a leading force behind the creation of the Hope Scholarship Program. The challenge with all of these programs is that families need to find out that they have the option. Of course, the districts were dragging their feet on letting them know. And then the districts in that case needed to sign off and verify that the child was a victim of bullying, also can be a challenge. So fortunately, states are now moving towards a universal model, including Florida. So parents don't have to go through this route of proving my child was a victim of bullying, let me out, let this child out. They can just enroll their child in the state's education savings account or scholarship program that's universally eligible. So that's the case in Florida. I think it's the case in about 18 states right now where we have universal eligibility. And I think that that's going to be a major solution that families are going to benefit from. And as we talk, I'd love to talk about federal solutions as well, and there's some on this topic.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, I mean, look, after the passage of Texas's education savings account program, the figure is now half of all children in the U.S. have access to some sort of private school scholarship program. And I agree with you completely. I mean, I think school choice is a necessary, but not sufficient condition to rectify these policies that we're talking about here. It provides a layer of transparency and accountability that nothing else will, right? I mean, the benefit from school choice is that you can change a child's environment immediately. You don't have to wait. So, Stephen,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what we're kind of we're looking at here is a system that hid behind administrative procedures before intervening in your son's case. And this reminds me of what happened in Florida in the case of Parkland,
Yep.
right? Florida had a very multi-step, multi-layered process of identifying students. It was called the Promise Program. It was the model program that the Obama administration touted all the time in Broward County of how they would choose to not discipline students with suspension or expulsion. They called it the school to prison pipeline, right? Instead, you would have various restorative circles for students to talk about it and not removing them. But it created a bureaucratic and administrative infrastructure that prevented them from acting. So that sounds familiar, right? I mean, that sounds like what's happening here.
Well, it certainly does. You know, just a few weeks ago, we were having a conversation about, on the United States Civil Rights Commission, I authored a report on teacher shortages and its impact on special needs kids. And one of the things that we found when we were studying this report was the number of children that were in special need programs, because states were saying, oh, we need more money to address special needs. But what we found was that many of the students that were in special needs were kids that had been bullied, and schools did not want to remove these children out of the school, so they would place them in special needs classes or special needs programs to get 504s and IEPs, rather than use the mechanisms on the disciplinary side to remove these children from the schools. And what we find is they continue to, very similar to what I shared with you about the Title IX thing. Well, we can't apply a discipline policy, a traditional discipline policy of the school district, unless the parents file a Title IX petition. Well, what's the use of having state-sanctioned guidelines or disciplinary actions if you're not going to enforce those? So yes, I mean, many times these school districts tend to use those federal designations and others to be able to avoid dealing with the issue of bullying.
And make no mistake, around the time of Parkland, the research found that when you left disruptive students in the classroom, that they would result in lower academic outcomes for their peers, that they would disrupt the school climate. I mean, there were teacher surveys showing that teachers were feeling unsafe because these students were being left in the classroom. So this is both a bureaucratic issue. It's one backed by research where we have the policies of leaving students in the classroom or harming the students. So let's talk about this issue of how much disruption there is and what the federal government has done about it. We were talking about it before. Before we came in, Ginny and I had a minute to kind of compare notes. So the numbers are pretty big, right? There's a federal report that comes out. It tracks the number of disciplinary issues that happen each year. And then we have the federal response that we talked about. So Ginny, can you walk us through that a little bit?
Well, a number of different federal reports, federal surveys, federal data collections, and the Department of Justice and NCES, at the Department of Education, put out a report that shows trends over time for like over a 10-year period. And if you look at the period from 2009 to 10 to 2019 to 20, you saw doubling of the cyberbullying incidents. And I think that we can safely assume that cyberbullying is woefully unreported because it is difficult to take to a school administrator and prove, especially in an era of Snapchat where things disappear. But we still had doubling. So there's that report out there. There's also the Civil Rights data collection. And in the 2021-2022 school year, in that report, there were 1.2 million violent offenses. So we can assume quite a few more with bullying. And that was the year where a lot of schools were closed still. So we do have a lot of incidents of unsafe school environments. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA, as reauthorized most recently 10 years ago, requires school districts and states to identify which schools are persistently dangerous schools. The state's going to define that persistently dangerous, but they have to report that, and they have to give families an option to leave that school. This is the unsafe school choice option under existing federal law. And in that year, where I mentioned there were 1.2 violent incidences reported, no schools were reported as persistently dangerous. No students were offered the unsafe school choice option. So we have a broken system at many levels, as we're talking about, but certainly at that level where those children have a federal right to be offered an option to attend another public school, public charter school, and that's not happening. No schools being reported as persistently dangerous in the whole country. So more recently, I think 5 states were reporting a handful of persistently dangerous schools, but fortunately the Trump administration last May issued what's called a Dear Colleague and provided guidance to states, reminding them of this requirement, encouraging them to smarten up when it comes to defining what is a persistently dangerous school, and reminding them of this obligation to inform parents. So hopefully there will be action on that front. A second federal opportunity would be the new federal scholarship tax credit, now being referred to as the Education Freedom Tax Credit, where scholarship granting organizations could form and offer scholarships for students who are victims of bullying in states that don't have universal school choice. So I think we've got a couple options there at the federal level. But parents can't depend on a federal education law in these instances. And I hope we'll talk a little bit about culture, because I heard you talk about the schools or the phones that the teachers had, and we know that parents are distracted by phones. The adults
Absolutely.
in those students' lives, the parents and the teachers, they need to get off their phones. They need to discipline those kids, and they need to be working on shaping their character. So we've got a cultural thing that we should be talking about too.
Absolutely, I would agree with that. I think you're spot on that. One of the things that really struck us with Daniel. Now, as I mentioned to you earlier, we have 2 older sons, and so we're older parents, meaning that we thought our days of dealing with all this stuff in education were over. But what we see with Daniel is a remarkable transition from what our 2 older boys experienced when they were in school, and unfortunately for parents, what I see is the ill-equipped ability for parents to even understand how this complex system of education and how complex we've made it so that parents can't participate. In this school district, I remember when our boys were younger, they would always say to parents, "We want you to be involved. We want parents engaged. We want parents to come to meetings and all those things." And so some years ago, my wife and some other people in the community, we organized a parent association. We said, well, you know what? Let's organize a parent association and get thousands of parents involved. And we ended up getting over 12,000 parents in the district, all engaged and involved. in going to students' IEP meetings with parents and 504 meetings with parents. And the school said, stop, we don't want any more parents involved. We don't want any more parents coming to the schools. And we found it remarkably fascinating because you would think that they would invite parents to be a part of these conversations, and yet it obviously became the opposite. And so that helped to really shed a lot of light on what is actually happening behind the walls of those schools. You know, in South Carolina, we used to be able to go, I don't know how that is in other parts of the country, but we would be able to go to our school and have lunch with your child if you wanted to have lunch with your child. I was used to that when my boys were younger. You're not allowed to do that now. They take you through a vetting process before you're able to come to the school to even have lunch with your child. So if you can't go into a school and have lunch with your kid, what do you think the school districts are doing when you have issues related to things like bullying and harassment or anything else that's happening within the school district in these schools where they're creating these firewalls to keep parents from being involved?
Yeah, and I have children about your age. We're not older parents. We're decorated parents.
Is that what it is?
We're
okay,
veterans.
all right, well, good.
Parents
Veterans, I like that.
So I was saying to someone earlier today that if you go to a K-12 school and the quietest room in the school is the lunchroom, that's a problem because all the students are looking at their phones. Now, fortunately, so let's talk about the culture for a minute, Ginny. So half of US states, thereabout, have some sort of policy involving cell phone use, and it usually has to do with turning the cell phone in, not using the cell phone during the school day. So I think that the culture that we need to reorient ourselves around is a culture of students focusing on original texts and original books, right? Instead of Chromebooks and cell phones.
Oh gosh, yes.
Well, you put that Chromebook word out there, and I want to follow up on that because kudos to Jonathan Haidt and the anxious generation and the cultural shift that we've seen at the state policy level with these state policies. And I think it's something like 20 states might have said no phone spelled a bell. But when you have a policy that still allows phones at lunch, in the hallways, you're still going to have a culture of that's unhealthy. And then when you have a state that says, district, please implement a cell phone policy, you're not gonna have anything change. So that's one concern that I have, that we're declaring victory too early when it comes to cell phone bans.
I agree.
The other is we have ubiquitous one-to-one devices in classrooms. 90% of secondary schools have one-to-one devices, so Chromebooks. And the statistic is like, it's still 86% for grades 3 to 5. 76% of K-2 classrooms have devices. Why do those kids have iPads during the school day? They're never going to be able to focus on in-depth texts if when they're supposed to be learning how to read, they are essentially playing on an iPad. So we absolutely still have ubiquitous screens in classrooms. They are causing distractions. Kids have just moved from what they were doing on phones to what they're doing on screens. They're watching YouTube, they're texting each other, and there's still the problem that needs to be addressed. So I do want to say we're not done. Don't declare victory. When it comes to these cell phone bans, I think policymakers like to think, check, we're done. You're not. And the culture is not going to change in the school unless we do something about the Chromebooks and the laptops and the iPads. The culture's not going to change broadly if parents don't stop giving their kids smartphones. 95% of teenagers have smartphones. 43% of tweens, ages 8 to 12. Why does an 8-year-old have a smartphone? So the victory, again, is not won. We've got to get kids off screens.
Yeah, no, excellent point. So, Stephen, as we think about the path forward for state policies around bullying, you sent me the 2011 report that the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights did about bullying, and I want to get your impressions of the way that bullying was defined on the front page of that report was not just one incident of a physical assault. It was a persistent examples of harassment, and what you described over the case of 2 weeks is clearly a persistent problem. How can the U.S. Commission, or for that matter, how can state policymakers in particular, help to enforce these kinds of things that we're describing about not allowing teachers to be delinquent from the discipline arena?
Yeah, I've given a lot of thought to that, Jonathan. And one of the things that I talked about just not long ago with the group, educators are mandatory reporters, supposedly. I'm assuming that's the case across the country. But with the mandatory reporting criteria, there is no penalty for not reporting. And what I mean by penalty, I mean, are you in jeopardy of losing your license if you don't be judicious about reporting these incidents and these situations of bullying and harassment? What I found about the issue of kids being bullied and harassment within public schools is that the mandatory reporting aspect of that typically involves more of a parent, a child coming to an educator saying something happened at home or something occurred, and as a result of that, the educator is responsible for ensuring that that's being reported. I think we've got to look at the policy in a holistic way to say, how do we ensure that that's not just happening from the child's perspective, but if educators are recognizing and seeing this. I shared with you with my son's story that this stuff had been going on for 2.5 years. We sent over 180 correspondences to the school in email format. One email that we sent to them that was shared with us from our child in the school from his Chromebook, he sends an email and he says, "Mom and Dad, please have Alex," who is my oldest son, who's the police officer, "please have Alex come and get me out of the school. These people are still trying to hurt me, and I'm not going to continue to allow them to try to hurt me. I'll hurt myself. Please, please, Mom and Dad, have Alex come get me." This was sent early in the morning, and so I'm hysterical. I think I was in Washington at the time. I'm trying to figure out what is going on with Daniel now, and I shared that with our board of trustees. I shared his email with the principal and the board of trustees and said, "Guys, we've sent you at that time about 70 emails around bullying and harassment. Does this drive your interest at all?" And there was nothing. Daniel was labeled as a snitch by his principals and his teachers because he was always telling that other children were bothering him. So if this is the pattern of what we're dealing with in schools, and I'll tell you something else that I picked up on with some of this. When we had conversations with the educators and within the schools, it was quite interesting to me that they almost seemed like the kids who were being harassed were the problem children. The bullies were kids that they felt like, you know what, yeah, we know this child may be, and they knew some of this, that this child would potentially be, doing whatever. But the kids who became the problem kids were the children who were reporting. And so as a consequence of that, guess what the kids in the schools who were being bullied and harassed decided to do? Not say anything. Because they didn't want to be labeled as snitches, as they described. I had to go to the principal and tell her, I said, if you have kids in the school that are using the term snitch, that is a violation of their civil rights. They should not be, and if you're allowing that to occur, and the principal even said to me, well, Dan, you need to be careful about being a snitch. In an email. So this is not, I didn't make this stuff up. I can't even believe every time I read the emails, I just can't even believe some of the stuff that they said within their own email about what they were doing, which tells you that the dysfunction has become commonplace in our schools when it comes to our children. That it's not one of these situations where they're paying attention to the details of it. One last point back to the situation about the voyeurism that occurred. The district sent us a letter, and I was reading this letter last night in preparation for this conversation today. It just blows my mind every time I read it. And in the letter, the district says, from the Title IX coordinator, by the way, Jenny, that because you and your wife did not file a Title IX petition, we're closing the case because we have no evidence that the child committed any wrongdoing. Child was arrested. Photo was captured in his phone, confiscated by law enforcement. Child admitted it, distributed all across the community and the district. And in the letter, and I'm happy to share this letter with you if you'd like to see it, they say that because we could not do an investigation, not that they couldn't, but based upon Title IX, they felt like the case was closed. So the child was going. As a matter of fact, we had to take Daniel out of the school because there was another situation that occurred in February of that same year where another child attacked him in the school. It was on video. And my wife and I were like, we just can't do this anymore to our child in the school. But our child, simply because of these actions by the adults and people that you would think would have the wherewithal to understand the rules. And I'll say this and I'll let it go. But it was very interesting that when we questioned their definition of how they were applying Title IX or misapplying Title IX, they told us, and this is a direct quote, guys, so that the Trump administration, in President Trump's first term, the reason they had to apply the rules that they were applying is because of how the Trump administration changed their policy, changed the policy around Title IX in the first administration. What they were trying to interpret, and this is very interesting, they said that under the Trump administration in the first term, Title IX was modified to say that in the case of college campuses where rape was reported of something of that nature, that there should be an investigation to look into some of those actions. So what school districts were doing, or are doing, is they're taking that simplistic definition of Title IX and saying we're going to apply that to any case of voyeurism or any action like that to avoid applying their discipline policy to remove children from school that are bullies. So these are things that when we talk about the complexity of the policy and more specifically, what can states do? And, and what I didn't tell you was this school district, so this case is in litigation, and the school district sought to remove the case to the federal court. And does anybody want to know why they wanted to remove it to federal court? Because they felt like they could escape the state actions, which state laws are a little stronger to address these issues than the federal law.
Hiding behind administrative hoops in order to
Yes.
And weaponizing them against parents.
Children, yes.
And families. We see this with FERPA. We see this with PPRA. And anytime we see it with the IDEA, anytime they can throw out a federal acronym, they use it as a weapon against parents. And sometimes it might be ignorance, sometimes it's willful ignorance, and sometimes it's malicious.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. We have a few minutes left. We're going to take some questions from the audience. I think there are some microphones in the back.
Well, while we're getting ready for that, Jonathan, I did want to mention that the rising anti-Semitism that we're seeing in K-12 schools is something that absolutely needs to be addressed, whether it's through discourse like this, in policy, exposing it. There was a congressional hearing, for example, just last fall about the rising anti-Semitism in K-12. And as our culture continues to coarsen, as influencers, as podcasters are encouraging anti-Semitic tropes and ways of thinking, we need to keep a really careful eye on that. And families who are impacted need to recognize that they do have the opportunity to file a complaint with Office for Civil Rights at the Department of Education. They have opportunities for lawsuits.
Oh, go ahead, Stephen.
No, I was going to say, and Jenny, thank you for bringing that point up, because the Commission, the United States Commission on Civil Rights, is actually having a hearing on, is it the 18th, Thomas, is that right? Next week, about the whole issue of anti-Semitism, both on college campuses and K-12. So I would encourage you to be a part of that conversation if you can be there.
Absolutely. I mean, look, when the students at Cooper Union, the Jewish students, were chased to hide in the attic of the library by violent protesters, if we did not see that there is something seriously wrong with the enforcement of protecting against anti-Semitism, then it just a shocking reliving of Anne Frank's story. Beyond the pale. Beyond the pale. Very good. We have a few minutes for questions. I have one in the front. If we can do in the front first, please.
Hi. Thank you for having this panel. This is for Jenny. If you're having the universal opportunity to go to those alternative schools, is there some way to make sure that the violent kids aren't signing up for that, number one? And number two, well, are they screening them? And then number two, when you have that alternative, is there some kind of concern that just like the whole school is going to move to the other school and then there's not going to be the first school? That's it.
Well, we haven't seen evidence of entire populations of schools moving, even as we've had expansion of school choice. Jonathan, did you say like 1.5 million students, or somebody threw that number out recently? That's not a lot of students when you're talking about
Who are participating in private school choice program.
Yeah. When you're talking about 50 million K-12 students nationwide or so. So we do have increasing participation in school choice programs. We do not have a mass exodus. And often if you're talking about a bully victim dynamic, the bully's doing okay. The bully's not the odd kid, or the kid with lagging social skills, or the kid that doesn't fit in. The bully's maybe the king of the castle, so they probably don't want to leave.
Yeah, it's never been the case in a private school choice program where there's been such an exodus or a change in enrollment that schools have had to shut down. And it's only been over the last few years that we've seen, it was just 2 weeks ago that Arizona announced they have 100,000 kids using education savings accounts. They've had an ESA program since 2011. We're proud.
Choice for years.
We're thrilled. Decades. We're thrilled about it. But this is something that it takes time to inform parents and to let them know, and for these programs to grow.
And plenty of parents are happy. So Florida has 500,000 students benefiting from the private scholarship option or the ESA, but they have over 2 million students in the state.
I think it sounds about right. It might be three, somewhere around 3, but yeah.
2.4 or something like that. These are still small fractions. Mass exodus is not going to happen. Really, the bigger challenge that school districts are facing right now is declining enrollment due to demographic cliff. There just weren't as many babies born.
Well, and I'll just comment on that. What's interesting in the school district that I'm referring to regarding my son, we've seen 5,000 students are prepared to leave next year due to the increase in charter schools. So it's incredible to see the number of, as a matter of fact, the board met last week to announce that they may have to lay off 1,400 teachers because of the number of kids leaving the school district. And a lot of that is due to the issues of violence that's been taking place within this particular school district of almost 30,000 kids.
Well, and we've heard from surveys from the U.S. Department of Education that children acting out disruptive events since COVID, those rates have been going up. So this
teachers report that too.
Yeah, what makes this such an important issue? Sir, yes, the gentleman in the blue.
Yeah, so from what I understand is that negative reinforcement doesn't work in the schools from your situation. And I've been all over the country. I've been to 17 cities, and I've gone into areas that you wonder if you're going to get out, right? But fortunately, I have a martial arts background and professional break dancer. I'm 60. I've been all over the country. I was RFK's National League for Safety and De-Escalation, so I saw bullying at the highest level because people can't even have conversations. So what I'll suggest to you is I have the solution to the bullying crisis. I'm the anti-bullying leadership resource for all New York City public schools. This all happened like months ago because they saw that what I had really worked and it cost nothing. So it's a very conservative, I went to the schools and realized that the system set up that when a child does something violent, They get suspended, they get expelled, they go to jail, right? So that's a downhill. And then what happens is, as you notice, is that now your son was more of the victim. I was your son. Every story you can imagine happened to me from the age of 8 to the age of 17. 8 years old, my head was slammed into the curb where blood was coming out of the back of my head. So it was very violent. It was Brooklyn. But positive reinforcement is the power. The program that's been established as the first mandated anti-bullying program in U.S. history is Elizabeth, New Jersey. The head of anti-bullying can tell you all about it. Children have 33 days to change the world. Why 33? Because 1 out of 3 kids get bullied all over the country. So it's a powerful number. The kids love it. They want to do it. So you're mandating something they actually want. But when you mandate something that's negative, everybody's in fear zone, and fear perpetuates fear. Love conquers all this fear, unquestionably. You can watch one of these events that they have in the 33rd day where they get the Harmony Power Award for doing something they want to do, not what the system says they need to do, but something positive to the community. And it's unbelievable, and you see it in mass volume. That's how you change youth culture. And with the AI around the corner in 3 years, like, what are these kids going to do? So now they're finding out what their creative talents are. So it's really about them finding out who they are soon enough so that they could actually move along with the AI development. It's just there are so many variables here that I couldn't even put into this conversation. I did the conference. They had the anti-bullying conference in New York City. I was the main speaker at the teachers union. So I spend a half hour talking about it. It blows you away. Yeah. It is the solution. There's nothing else I've seen out there that actually works.
Thank you for the comment. Other questions? We do have a question from online. So this is for both of you. Stephen, we'll start with you. So what, if any, legal claims can be brought in court against school districts and school officials? And I'm assuming if they don't enforce what their schools' anti-bullying measures are. So what can be brought against them?
Well,
what legal claims?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones was this whole indifference piece, right? On whether or not there is reckless neglect to this whole issue of kids that we know that these things are happening and school districts just choose not to do anything. South Carolina, under its tort laws, have those options available for parents to be able to exercise under those laws. But I just think that even when we think about the current law, whether it's state law or federal law, we've got to put more teeth into educators who know this stuff is going on in schools. I recommended just to our legislature in South Carolina recently that if a school district is consistently been engaged in these actions, we've got to reduce funding for these schools. We need to look at mechanisms on the funding side to reduce the tax dollars that are going to these school districts, because the way I see it is that we're enabling school districts to continue this without any consequences. I'm a former county administrator, and in our state, county governments fund school districts with local property tax money, a portion of that. And the way it works is the county governments write a check to a school district every year to the tune of hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars with no accountability, zero. And if you don't believe me, you come to a county council meeting, the school district gets up, presents their budget, county council says, okay, we approve your $200 million, and they don't ask them, well, what's happening with your bullying policy? What's going on with your nothing? And I actually just recently shared this with our county council. I said, how crazy is that you're giving it? So I just think even from the local level, we have to begin to be honest about the accountabilities pieces that we must put in place and to ensure that we can do that. I think.
So we have about 45 seconds left. Oh, okay, one more question. It will make it quick, lightning round.
Add on to what you said, because this is happening in our school. We had a teacher this is a different issue, but they're giving illicit material to our students to read the books. And we have a policy in our state that says that the parents need to be notified if there's any illicit material. And they're still doing it. And the indifference is totally there from the administrators, from the teachers. And I agree with you 100% that it's follow the money. If they get, as much as these teachers get paid, and yet there's no accountability. And even though they're breaking the state law by not notifying the parents about the illicit material, they're still doing it. And the principal will do nothing, the superintendent will do nothing. And it is so frustrating. They break the law and there's no repercussion.
And I think that's why school choice is such an important layer here, because it is a necessary, if not sufficient, condition to provide the layer of transparency that nothing else will. All right, so Ginny, we're finished up on time here, but let's walk away with what the big solutions were. We talked about school choice.
School choice at the state level, especially as we move to universal as an escape route, but also a point of competition for school districts so that they could create safe environments that will keep students enrolled. School choice at the federal level with the unsafe school choice option that states need to be defining persistently dangerous schools, informing families about that option. And then with the federal scholarship tax credit, SGOs can form to provide scholarships for students who are bullied. And then also don't stop with just cell phone bans. Let's get those one-to-one devices out of classrooms. Enough of being hooked on these expensive education technology contracts. They're creating, I think, unsafe environments and distracting students from learning.
Thank you, Virginia. Thank you, Stephen. Please help me in thanking our speakers. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.